All right. Hello, Jennifer Reeder. Tell me about finding the initial inspiration, the first kernel of to make Perpetrator.
So, I had been asked a bunch of times during Q&As or even in the press about films leading up to the making of Perpetrator. I had been asked often what my experience was like working with so many young women, having so many young women on set in front of the camera. And my answer was always the same. It's awesome. I love it. That's why I keep doing it.
Oh.
But then I realized that the people asking the question, the assumption was that it wasn't awesome and that it was right, that it was just like I might as well be directing a pack of Wolverines or something like this. And so I started thinking about the way that our culture is really obsessed with youth and beauty, especially among young women. And yet we've kind of created this machine that's built to sort of destroy their evolution. And so I started thinking about, the way that we talk about young women who have agency over their sexuality, over their independence. We might say something like she's wild and out of control. And that phrase is not really used to sort of like uplift their agency. It's really meant to sort of diminish their agency. And so I started thinking about a wild and out of control girl who really becomes wild and out of control, which is sort of the basis of any classic shapeshifter story. And I had coincidentally, had rewatched the 80s iteration of Cat People, which is a really
Yeah.
great kind of nuanced, kind of provocative, unexpected shapeshifter story. And so I just thought, okay, we're gonna go make a coming of age shapeshifter story. And then eventually we got to Perpetrator.
That's pretty cool. Cat people kind of kicked it off in a way.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Were there other like influences? It purely like because I felt like it was kind of like I felt two things. I felt like a coming of age story, and I felt like something a bit more like psychedelic. But I mean, it's
Mhm.
interwoven, but it felt like kind of two kernels to me, and it was kind of interesting to see how it interweaved. What were some other weird influences for this?
Um, well, I mean, some maybe not so weird cinematic, reference
Yeah.
that always get compared to the, my Uncle David's, David Lynch and David Cronenberg. Neither one of them are actually my uncle.
That's
But for instance, something like Cronenberg's Scanners. I mean, there's that, that often has felt like in terms of the content, that was a really productive film to rewatch a couple of times, or the sort of trippiness of something like Videodrome. It's
yes.
like, right, I mean, just really special, really special film. um but maybe a non, like more of a non sort of film reference
Yeah.
would be the some of the photographs of an American photographer, Francesca Woodman,
Okay.
who is not super famous. She passed away when she was 22, sort of tragically by suicide. So there, and her family has kept a lot of her images sort of with the estate. But if you look up anything that Francesca Woodman has done, she really worked with these really provocative, allegorical kind of double image, double exposure, a lot of self-portrait, so there was, so even just thinking about Johnny's shape shifting after I knew that she wasn't going to be a vampire or a werewolf, I really, there were references like those Woodman photographs that sort of begun to give me kind of an idea of what her shifting, could actually look like. I also love the paintings of Jenny Saville, that are these like really visceral, kind of goopy pinks and reds, and very kind of abject and gorgeous at the same time, which I think that one of the things that myself and my DP and the production designer, et cetera, really leaned into is this idea of, like the kind of unrelenting blood that would be both totally disgusting and abject, and yet also really, gorgeous in its, redness.
And eating lipstick.
Yes.
which is more relatable and disgusting in a way, right?
Yes. I mean, that was edible lipstick. We did have, it tasted like coconut or something, evidently.
I really didn't know that yet.
Yeah. So we didn't, so poor Kaya did not have to eat actual lipstick. Our amazing prop wrangler, Amanda, looked on, the old internet and found a recipe for, edible lipstick. I mean, it still did the trick and looks really awful and certainly brings a groan, when the audiences have been watching that part.
Yeah, sure. So you were saying you're talking about female agency in adolescence. I was wondering that some of the coming of age storyline, if there was some, if there were other things you were saying about adolescence, or if you wanted to, just sort of talk a bit more about the agency side of it.
Sure. I mean, I really I wanted to introduce Johnny's character as she's got a little bit of a kind of Robin Hood quality. When we meet her at the beginning, she's broken into a home and is stealing things out of the house, not necessarily well, we sort of like learn then slightly later on that she's stealing things to sell things to get money to help her dad subsidize their rent,
Mhm.
and her kind of deadbeat dad. And so I think that I wanted the audience to also understand about there are a lot of young people whose parents themselves are kind of going through a second coming of age,
Mm.
and how young people navigate, like, sometimes having to parent their parents, or how
Right.
young people have to grow up. Some grow up faster than others if they are um if they're really trying to literally keep a roof over their head. So I think that I've always wanted to present teenagers who were, and especially teenage girls, who were um complex, layered, and also kind of unpack the sort of myth of the mean girl. We sort of think that maybe Johnny's this kind of surly, bratty, young woman, when in fact, she cares deeply about her dad, who's kind of messed up, and she cares deeply about making sure that they have, a comfortable life. We understand, when she goes to sort of sell some of the stuff that she's stolen, that she's selling it to a guy who sort of teases her about maybe, like being sexually involved with him or something, and then she refuses, and he hits her. I mean, I think that I also wanted to sort of present this idea that there's a lot of young women who leave the house every day and they just want to survive. They just want to live their life. They just want to survive the day and not be thought of as like prey, or not be thought of as simply a kind of a sexual being. And that a lot of young people, and mine and my scripts, have those kind of secrets, and we they deserve better.
Hmm. I felt like there was a cool buildup in the movie. I felt things were sort of offbeat and strange at first, and then we kind of get really crazy. But I don't know if you would say it's like a slow burn, or tell me about structuring the scripts to get that nice flow that you had there.
Sure. Well, it took a while to figure out the pacing of this one.
Hmm.
And including the fact that even in post-production there were two big scenes that worked as scenes at the beginning, before Johnny gets to Hildy's house, that with test audiences they just said those, the whole thing slows the beginning down. And what we really want, we cannot wait for her to get to Hildy's house. And so you have to do that tough thing, which is to sort of let some scenes go that you feel confident about, but that if an audience is like, we got to get to Hildy's house, so then you sort of restructure the beginning, or I restructure the beginning, so that what we established was sort of who Johnny is when she's outside of the house. She's sort of this like little kind of a criminal dealing with, some other nefarious people. She cares about her dad, who's kind of a mess. He has kind of reached his limit, dealing with her. And then later on, we realize dealing with himself, that he's really going through some stuff. So part of the pacing is like practical. We wanted to get her to Hildy's house, but then once she's at Hildy's house, you also kind of have to establish who Hildy is, because Hildy's a kind of a prickly, unknowable kind of person also. And I wanted to be able to establish the school environment, that dynamic with those young women, and drop other little kind of hints about her turning 18 and what that might mean, which even if she wasn't getting ready to inherit shape-shifting abilities when she turned 18, sometimes that's a big deal. You're a legal adult. I mean, it's a marker, a milestone for sure. But yeah, getting the pacing in this one was it was tricky. And with a film that I did previously that came out in 2019, that was at Fantasia in 2019, Knives and Skin, that film has much more of like a drifty pacing, a kind of a swirly pacing. It's slower. It sort of like unfolds in a much more kind of languid way. And this one, I wanted it to just kind of, move a little faster. But I also think that some of those moves that make the pacing a little faster also allow for, some moments that maybe, move a little slower. And, I didn't go to film school. I went to art school, so I mean, I made films,
cool.
and I made films in art school, but I was never really, so much of, like, for better or for worse, so much of like how I write and then how I put a film together is kind of that instinct of what sort of like feels right for that scene, or what feels right for something, overall. Or maybe it's like the music in a scene is really driving the pacing of the cuts. And I'm realizing after having made 50 some films or something like that, that it's not that I don't always follow what is considered a kind of conventional pacing, or a conventional sort of action reaction. It's not how I want to tell a story. Life itself is weird and chaotic and lumpy, and life's pacing is unpredictable, and I just think that my films kind of lean into that chaos.
Yeah, I felt like it started off like a Peter Strickland movie, and then that would like dip here and there, and then we turned into like a Blumhouse movie. It was kind of like it was a very unique experience for me.
Yeah, someone recently told me that well, a couple of years ago, I forget which film I had in the Berlinale, but one of my friends who's working for the festival said your films aren't round. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. And he said they just like they turn sharp corners. Every time that you think that sort of like where you're going, and then it goes sharply in another direction. And then when I was just
totally life, right?
Yes, totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I also write purposefully, like that, but it's always nice when it lands. And I think that those kind of sharp corners are why probably my films aren't for everybody, because some people just don't like those sharp corners. But I feel like I've found the people who appreciate the sharp corners. And when I was just recently at the Tribeca Film Festival with it, a friend of mine, Landon, who was one of the founders of the Overlook Film Festival, who sees lots and lots of genre films, kind of said the same thing. He was like, God, every moment in your film when I think I know what's going to happen, that doesn't happen, and something else happens that I was not expecting. And I mean, he said that as a real compliment, and so I appreciate that.
Cool. Are you excited to engage with the Fantasia Fest audience? Do you have any general comments of what they're like?
Oh, I mean, look, the Fantasia audiences are some of the best, aside from the meowing, which I just I can't get enough of ever. it's like, I just think that, Mitch and his team do such a great job anyway, programming so many good films over such a long period of time, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? And so
it's a
it's like the
beast.
longest festival, right? But I
Yeah,
think those audiences never, they're in it to win it, right? They never get tired. They never are like, okay, well, I've done the first 2 weeks. I'm not going to come back for week three. They really, I think, map out their Fantasia experience. And I mean, I love Montreal. I've been to Montreal a bunch of times. So anyway, it's
cool.
really always great to come back to Montreal. And to those audiences in particular, because I have a lot of friends who live in Montreal. So I always know there's going to be some friends in the audience. But the audiences are, aside from being like genre fans, they feel
Mm.
like they're also real cinephiles, and they ask smart questions, and
Mm.
they are just, engaged and supportive, so I can't ask for a better experience than I've had, at Fantasia in particular. So yeah, I'm excited to come back.
That's great. Well, Jennifer, thanks so much for your time. It was really nice chatting to you today about your movie, Perpetrator. I really enjoyed watching it yesterday.
Thank you,
Before I let you
Michael.
go, what's next for you?
So when the writers strike is over here in the
Sure.
US, I've got two brand new scripts that I'm ready to, start, packaging up. One of them is um people laugh when I say this, but it's true. One of them is like a really gnarly action film, that
Nice.
speaking of, like, of David Cronenberg, is a little like a female, driven history of violence. So
Okay.
we sort of like, or kind of like, if we met Mallory Knox from Natural Born Killers, like when she was in her 70s, what is that story? So it's still coming right from my DNA, but it's a really, gnarly, properly gnarly action film. And then I adapted this beautiful short story called Nest by an American author named Juliana Baggett, which is about sort of a community of people kind of dealing with the guilt and grief after one of their community leaders passes away from suicide, and the kind of unknowableness of a death like that kind of builds a kind of a monster that haunts the neighborhood. So that one's got like tones that are, a little like the Babadook, but at the same time, it's sort
Uh,
of nothing like that. So they're two very different stories. I'm ready to go whichever one is ready to go first. But no, it was a busy spring. We launched Perpetrator out of the Berlinale, which I love doing, and then I'm just like, okay, that baby's born. Let's move on to the next one.
all right, great. Well, it was really nice to meet you today. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much.